Brothers and sisters, pay close attention to what I'm about to share. It's a tale that could change how you see the world forever. They tried to silence my message with a pile of papers. A dozen sheets drafted by outsiders, unsigned, hollow. It was a script for surrender, a regret disguised as diplomacy. They urged me, deliver this, President Traore. Don't resist. This is the path to alliances, to survival. But I wasn't chosen to repeat foreign lines at the United Nations. My people didn't elect me to bow quietly. I wasn't there to apologize for exposing hard truths about Israel, France, or the silent war strangling Africa. My duty was to speak for the voiceless, for a continent silenced for centuries. No document, no outside force, no threats of exclusion could change that. I crumpled their draft and threw it away. When I walked to that podium, I carried only my own words, words that shook the entire hall. It began with my earlier address, the one they claimed crossed lines. I had spoken of Gaza. I drew connections between the pain of Palestinian families and those suffering in Mali, Congo, and Niger. I warned that African silence made us accomplices. That warning enraged the so-called guardians of peace. Soon, a formal note arrived from the UN Secretary General's office, accusing me of stirring tensions and undermining cooperation. They didn't invite me for dialogue. They demanded correction. What they wanted was not explanation, but retraction. The pressure grew. Messages poured in from Paris, Washington, Tel Aviv. Back channels buzzed with offers and threats. Incentives dangled, then warnings followed. We may reconsider aid packages if you don't adjust. We understand your view, but you wouldn't want sanctions. Then came the boldest move, a ready-made statement for me. 4 sections apologizing for my delivery, 3 correcting my language, 5 pledging loyalty to common principles. But whose principles? From where I stood, our principles didn't include ignoring atrocities. I could have refused the trip, pretended I never received their draft. But I knew the game. If I stayed silent, they'd twist the story. If I skipped it, they'd call me a coward. So I went to New York, without notes, without regret, without the slightest plan to yield. But before that moment, their desperation showed. Just days after the forced script was delivered, my private line rang at midnight, a number known to only a few. A voice introduced itself, President Traore. This is an ambassador from the U.S. State Department. We must talk. Soon, a dark car pulled up at the palace, unmarked, unannounced. The ambassador entered with 2 companions, no ceremony. Mr. President. He began sitting without invitation. We have a problem. He slid open files, aerial photos of our gold mines, details of new Chinese infrastructure deals, dossiers on Russian advisors. We know everything, he said calmly. For now, we present it as business, not something deeper. I leaned back and asked, and what do you believe the truth is, Ambassador? His reply, the beginning of moves that could destabilize your nation. He wasn't entirely wrong. For months, we had been reshaping alliances. Chinese engineers were rebuilding our networks. Russian experts were revitalizing agriculture. Firms were constructing hospitals for self-reliance, not to reject the West, but because we saw that dependency was just bondage dressed in finer words. The ambassador pressed further. That UN speech doesn't have to be hostile. You can share your ideas while preserving ties, he suggested. I paused, then countered. Ambassador, when your nation invaded Iraq, did you first ask the UN for forgiveness? That's different, he replied. When France marched into Mali, did they consult Africans? Not comparable, he insisted. And when Israel bombs Palestinian schools, do they prepare speeches of remorse? He closed his file and stood. You're intelligent, President Traore. Choose wisely. Once he left, I called in my head of security. How many foreign agents are we tracking in Ouagadougou? 17 confirmed, likely twice as many undetected. And our communications, all tapped, but we've been feeding them misinformation for months. Good. Tomorrow, spread word that I'm rethinking the UN address. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of word? The kind that suggests I might deliver their version. He understood instantly. What Richardson's superiors didn't grasp was this. I wasn't only rejecting their draft, I was preparing to expose its source. By dawn, African diplomatic circles buzzed with talk that President Traoré was reconsidering seeking to repair ties. CNN ran a headline, "Burkina Faso may moderate its tone." BBC cited sources claiming I was looking for middle ground. In Washington, officials congratulated themselves, blind to the fact they'd been outplayed. While they celebrated, I stood before 50,000 people in Ouagadougou's central square and declared my true intentions. They expect us to apologize. I told the crowd, they see Africa as a land that must beg for permission to speak truth. The thunder of their voices shook the plaza. But at the UN, I vowed, I will speak for every African dismissed as unworthy of more than scraps. Elders wept, youth chanted, even children felt the charge. They may cut aid, impose sanctions, draft endless condemnations, but they cannot enforce submission. That night, President Kagame of Rwanda called. Brother, I heard about your UN slot. Are you ready for the backlash, Paul? We've been ready all our lives. The real question is, are we done being afraid? He fell silent. What support do you need? None. Just remember this moment. When they tried to corner us, we chose honor over comfort. Days later, on the flight to New York, my advisor made one final appeal. Sir, we could acknowledge their concerns without backing down. I gazed out at the ocean below. Minister, why do they crave my regret? Because regret sets precedent. Regretting truth about Gaza teaches the world honesty can be bargained away. Regretting French interference normalizes it. Regretting dignity makes it optional. I turned to him. This is bigger than me. This is Africa refusing victimhood without apology. At JFK, a crowd awaited. Not protesters, supporters. 200 Africans from the diaspora somehow already informed, waving banners. Africa stands firm. Traore speaks our truth. As we drove, I lowered the window. A young woman rushed close, shouting, "Let them hear us, President. Make our words matter." That's when it struck me. This wasn't just another speech. It had become something monumental. Entering the UN hall, the weight of expectation pressed down. Delegates from every corner of the globe watched the audacious African from Burkina Faso. Some smirked, others looked away. I stepped to the microphone, adjusted it, and began. Before demanding my regret, answer me this. How many times have you atoned for Africa's wounds? The chamber fell silent. Has Belgium ever repented for Congo's horrors? Has France for the slaughter in Algeria? Has Israel for arming groups that ravaged our lands? Cameras zoomed closer. Delegates shifted uneasily in their seats. I pressed on. You call my honesty divisive, yet God's devastation you label security. African youth die because of your policies, and you dismiss it as market forces. When we assert our dignity, you tremble. But Africa fears no more. We do not seek your approval to demand respect. The West preaches peace while exporting conflict. It proclaims democracy while funding coups. It offers aid while shackling us with debt. Midway through my words, the French representative stood and walked out. Let him leave. This was not a speech. It was accountability. Then I surprised them all. From the UN stage, I pulled out a note from a 12-year-old girl in Ouagadougou that I had received that very morning. The chamber fell silent. Sir, my teacher says you are going to speak for us. Don't shrink us. We are African and strong. I looked up. That child carried more wisdom than this entire assembly. Guards fidgeted nervously. I had strayed far beyond their expectations. What do I regret? Only this, that it took so long for an African voice to rise without fear. I regret that leaders before me bartered freedom for survival. I regret that children grew up believing their dreams required foreign permission. I regret that alliances were mistaken for inferiority, but I will not regret rejecting control disguised as dialogue. I will not regret tearing up agreements that impoverish us. I will not regret African pride. If that unsettles you, then you are tasting the bitterness we have endured for centuries. The room froze. No cheers, no interruptions. Applause was never my aim, reflection was. Within hours, history shifted. The African Union convened an emergency session. 43 envoys gathered at Ethiopia's UN outpost, debating not loans or trade deals, but renewal. Within days, a dozen leaders endorsed it, yet the real impact unfolded among ordinary people. In Nairobi, campuses held forums on self-rule. In Lagos, vendors boycotted companies tied to disputed territories. In Accra, music halls echoed with verses inspired by my words. In Cape Town, murals emerged of Nkrumah, Mandela, and now me, symbols of enduring defiance. Headlines erupted worldwide. Burkina Faso's Traoré confronts powers. Leader rejects remorse. Bold words shock envoys. They expected restraint. I delivered unfiltered independence. Retribution was swift. The EU froze millions in grants. The IMF delayed relief. French media smeared me as a tyrant. A US group declared, Burkina Faso isolates itself with reckless diplomacy. But I had warned my people. What they call isolation, we call liberty. Then something unexpected happened. The world began to listen. In Kenya, marches rang out, "He speaks for us." Jamaican broadcasters aired my full speech, praising an African leader with backbone. In Harlem, artists painted my silhouette across Africa with the words, "No regrets." Days later, a call came from Haiti's president, "You have strengthened our resolve." Soon after, Haiti withdrew from World Bank programs, and other Caribbean nations echoed the move. I realized then I had shifted from national leader to a symbol for the silenced everywhere. Within weeks, 5 African heads of state reached out. "You spoke our buried truths," they admitted. Citizens rallied too. In Ghana, forums exposed foreign manipulation. In Nigeria, people demanded, "When will our leaders echo Traore?" Back home, crowds filled the central square, not to protest but to participate. They repaired schools with local labor, restored water systems with native skill, and sparked innovations across the nation. On television, an elder put it simply, "I'm no scholar, but today I am proud to be Burkinabe." That was the West's blind spot. They measure strength and currency, but ours is measured in dignity. We stood in self-respect. What unsettled them most was not rebellion but competence. They had long believed African leaders needed their guidance, fed on myths of our inadequacy. My precise dismantling of that illusion shattered their assumptions. We were not wards of anyone. We were sovereign equals. The ripples spread through capitals. If tiny Burkina Faso could lecture on global norms, imagine the resonance of Nigeria's roar, South Africa's influence, Egypt's position. Weeks later, my minister rushed in with a leaked U.S. memo titled Post, Trade African Dynamics. Its pages brimmed with alarm. This trajectory endangers Western sway in critical zones. If replicated, old systems of control could collapse within years. Exactly right. And the tide rolled on. Tanzania revised its mining laws to favor local communities. Zambia tied exports to recognition of Palestine. Senegal expelled French troops. Each move carried the banner of self-governance, all inspired by the refusal to bow under the weight of manufactured regrets. Those regrets had always been symbolic shackles, tools to enforce obedience. They had wanted Africa's public deference. I denied it, not from arrogance or bitterness, but because silence had cost us too much. Stolen borders, exploited youth, chaos funded from abroad, poisoned rivers rebranded as development. No more. Returning home, the streets overflowed with crowds. Not protesters, but family. They lined the roads with signs, "Welcome back, you spoke for us." In the square, an elder approached, slipping past the guards. I let him through. He whispered in dialect, "Son, I fought for freedom in 1960. You have validated that struggle." Then he handed me a relic, our original independence flag. "Keep this," he urged, "to remember that liberty is a daily choice." That night, as the banner unfurled in my hands, I realized the UN moment had birthed a new era, Africa unapologetic, confident in its strength, sharp in its negotiations, careful to separate genuine dialogue from submission. Months later, the African Union invited me to lead discussions on a new continental direction. Preparing for it, I thought of the grandmother in tears, the young student's fire, the veteran's gift. They wanted not only my words, but proof that their voices mattered in mine. My message to all was simple: never regret defending your people. Never trade truth for convenience. Never swap facts for hollow pacts. History honors the bold. It will not remember supposed concessions. It will remember Africa's upright refusal. For centuries muted, our tone now echoes theirs. Defiance has taught us to stand tall. Choosing honor over ease has shown the world it can be done. This was never mine alone. It belongs to the overlooked, the underestimated, the dismissed. Together we are amplified, unshaken. If you believe in Africa's right to speak without license, if you resist imposed boundaries, know this: we are not inferior. Only underrepresented. Hold fast to that. Our refusal to regret is our claim to self-determination. The next attempt to silence us will meet not one voice, but millions. No apology, no retreat, only Africa rising. But the true story began after the podium. Days later, my aide showed me a device lit up with streams of messages. Social networks blazed, not just with clips of my speech already viral, but with everyday Africans rising. In Nigeria, a market trader named Amina filmed herself confronting a French buyer who tried to cheat her. Like President Traoré said, she declared, "We plead no more." Millions tuned in across Ghana as students surrounded a U.S. mining office, demanding full transparency on profits versus taxes. Their live stream exploded in views. In Kenya, farmers refused outdated export rates, declaring, "We'll sell elsewhere. Our harvest has value." Outrage that had simmered only weeks earlier now surged into decisive action. One haunting clip came from South Africa. A teenager stood at an old apartheid site, her camera fixed on her grandmother. The elder recalled how she had once been forced to apologize. Apologies for walking in her homeland. Apologies for her skin. The girl's voice was steady. Traoré showed us, no more. Not for being African. Respect requires recognition of worth. She ended with conviction. No regrets for ownership. No crumbs in exchange for dignity. The video spread like wildfire. It struck me then. The speech had shattered mental barriers. Generations trained to regret their presence, their fairness, even their gratitude, were suddenly released from that burden. A single refusal to apologize had given millions the courage to stop. Weeks later, engagement soared, not rebellion, but participation. Youth in Senegal filled public roles. Tanzania welcomed returnees launching new ventures. Ethiopia's tech classes overflowed. Botswana's farms expanded beyond measure. Inspiration turned to tangible change. Back home in Burkina Faso, villagers repaired wells with their own hands, schools taught using local materials, and agriculture embraced ancestral methods once dismissed as primitive. Those traditions, aligned perfectly with our soil, doubled yields. Indigenous seeds withstood harsh climates better than imported strains. By honoring our heritage, we surpassed foreign prescriptions. Within a year, the results were undeniable. A nation once dependent now fed itself without aid. Across the continent, resource deals were renegotiated. Profits captured locally, technologies developed in-house. Trade agreements that once stalled under foreign pressure now moved forward under popular demand. People had tasted unapologetic excellence, and they hungered for more. The ripple spread beyond Africa. Native communities in the Americas invoked it in their struggle for land. Australia's first people cited it in their campaigns for rights. Island nations evoked it to defend their legacies. A global no-regret ethos had been born, tied to one stand, one leader who placed honor above submission. The remorse they craved from us would never come. Africa owed none.